Today we're going to go back in time to 2016 and see what the presidential prediction betting markets were like in the lead up to the election. We're going to see how accurate they were for some of the key states and see if they could be helpful or actually not helpful for this upcoming election. So what we're looking at here is the Real Clear Politics final presidential map if there were no toss-ups. And it actually was one of the better final predictions. It still has Hillary winning with 272, Trump is at 266, but let's look at some of the close states back then as well as the battleground states for 2024. I would use the data and the graph for Real Clear Politics, but they just did not have it easily accessible for every state. So we're going to start in Arizona and use 538. Now they have three different models in the top left that you can use. We're going to use the one that's polls only. In this one, they had Trump winning the state. Of course, he did win it by about 3.5, but look at the months before the election. This race was back and forth. Several different times Hillary was favored. The polling toward the end pretty much did have Trump in the lead, but there were a few that did have Clinton with an advantage. So how did this affect where people are putting their money? For that, we're going to get on Predicted. So here's the 90 days leading up to the election. Trump did have a significant lead. He was in the mid to high 70s. But then with 1 month to go before the election, it narrowed up to a dead heat. Finally, in the last week or two, Trump did regain the lead and he never looked back. How about the next state of Nevada? This one went to Hillary by about 2.5. But this is another one that was completely back and forth. It narrowed up multiple times leading up to the election. In the end, the final prediction was Hillary with about a 58% chance of winning. The polls in the final month of the election did have it back and forth, but Hillary was ahead in more of them. How about on Predicted? On this one, Hillary actually never relinquished her lead. It got very, very close in mid-September, but Trump was never able to lead on this market. How about in Georgia, where Trump won by 5 points? On 538, Trump was favored with 79%, but there was a point back in August where Hillary was actually ahead for a little while. Down in the polling, Trump was ahead in nearly all of them in the lead up to the election. The betting market here did have Trump ahead the entire 3 months. It got close, but Trump maintained his comfortable advantage. How about in North Carolina, where Trump won by more than 3.5? This one actually had Hillary with slightly better odds, 55 to 45. And again, in the lead up to the election, that one did go back and forth. The final polls again were scattered, but it did look like Hillary was slightly ahead. Unpredicted, this time Hillary did have a lead on election day. It was close enough that there's not really a lot of shame in being wrong, but this was ultimately a miss for the market. Now, what about the Rust Belt states? Those are famously the ones that vastly underestimated Trump. In Wisconsin, on 538, Hillary was at an 83.5% chance. That is overwhelming. Trump was never even close to being favored in this state. He peaked in the mid-30s. And all the polling in the lead-up did have Hillary in the lead. On Predicted, the market reflected that polling pretty clearly. On Election Day, Hillary was actually at 90 cents favored to win. On the surface, it would seem extremely unlikely to overcome a 90-cent favorability. But then, of course, you can see on Election Day that rapidly flipped to the opposite direction. It's going to be similar in Michigan, where Hillary had about a 79% chance to win according to 538. Again, Trump was never really close to being favored. The final polls again had Hillary in the lead. A lot of them were comfortably so. And the market again was in the high 80s, close to 90 cents in favor of Hillary. Now, Michigan did face a recount, so some of this data goes on after the election. But all the lead up pointed to Hillary winning this state. Let's check out Pennsylvania, where it's going to be a similar theme. Hillary with a big lead here. This one in late July, Trump did get close on, but it never flipped. In the final polls, Hillary was ahead in nearly all of them. How did that play into the market? Well, Hillary had a significant lead. On Election Day, she was close to the mid-80s, and this market did not budge too much in the 3 months prior to the election. Those are the states that Trump came out of nowhere and shocked everybody with. But what about the former premium swing state of Florida? Let's take a look at that on 538. Hillary was favored by 10 points, 55 to 45. That's another one that had wild swings leading up to the election. Trump was ahead a couple of times, but on Election Day, Hillary was slightly favored. The polling there was pretty split. Hillary was ahead in some, Trump was ahead in others. Over on the market, if you take a look at that, Hillary was ahead in all of it except about a week before the election when Trump broke even and then took a slight advantage. But then on Election Day, Hillary was favored with 70 cents. Of course, Trump went on to win the state, but with money on the line, Hillary was slightly favored. And let's take a look at one more of these. Let's do Ohio. This one Trump won comfortably by about 8 points, and 538 got this one right. He was favored with 65%. However, just a few weeks before the election, it was the inverse. Hillary was favored with about 65%. Even further back in August, Hillary was favored in the high 70s. If you look at these individual polls right at the end, there were several that were tied. Trump was in the lead with most of them. Hillary was ahead in a few. How did that affect the market? Well, on Election Day, Trump was favored. But again, just a few weeks before the election, Hillary was favored with about 70 cents. And even further back than that, in August, Hillary was again favored. So let's look at some of the markets for some of these states about 8 years ago. Now, the markets are subject to different things, but polling is obviously going to be a significant factor. One poll doesn't necessarily shock the entire market, but once you have a series of polls, maybe over a few weeks, that does start to move the needle. And I don't necessarily blame people in these markets. The pundits, the polls, the theme, the controversy surrounding Trump, it looked like he was going down and it wasn't going to be particularly close. It was a complete shockwave, and there were some people that probably lost and won a lot of money on these markets. Now, if we apply these prediction markets on Election Day 2016 to the map, this is what it would look like. So they were correct in places like Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, but they completely dropped the ball in Florida, North Carolina, and the Rust Belt. I think the main takeaway here is the prediction markets are useful to a point. There's plenty of times they're going to be correct, but I think there's enough times there, particularly in 2016, where they were way off. I can see if the markets were not so confident that Hillary was going to win all these states, then there's not a lot of shame in being off in a close market. But when she was close to 90 cents in some of these Rust Belt states, that's way too much of an outlier to take seriously. Now, the actual margins in those states were very narrow. We've got to keep that in mind. And I think the predominant factor is the polling just vastly underestimated Trump and overestimated Hillary. That's what drove these markets so heavily in her favor. So maybe I'll take a look at 2020 at some point, and what happened in 2016 probably played a role in 2020, but we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in 2024. It's easy to look at markets in June, July, or even August and think you've got it all figured out. But as we've seen, sometimes there's wild swings 2, 3, even 4 times in the 4 or 5 months leading up to an election. Some of these states had a lot of movement just a few weeks before the election. So I always caution people to be open to a range of different outcomes. Things can and sometimes do change quickly and close to the election. Doesn't mean it's going to happen next time, but at least try to be open to the possibility. I'll close with this final market that asked who's going to actually win that 2016 presidential election. Due to some recounts, again, this one does not show the full 3 months leading up to the election, but in the month and a half prior, Hillary was favored. She was at about 80 cents on election day. So 80 cents is usually pretty confident, but in 2016, we saw 80%, even 90% confidence get wiped out. So I'm going to leave it there, but that's a quick recap of the 2016 presidential prediction betting markets. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about the markets back in 2016? And do you think it's likely they'll be much more accurate in 2024? And are you open to seeing things change in the lead up to the election? Let me know down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.